Actually, today we're doing something a little bit different. I started about I don't know about a week ago, just something um, experimental, let's say. And I mean, I'm sure you can pretty much get your fill of all the crazy stuff that is going on politically and how America is going down the tube, so to speak. So the other day, I proposed to subscribers in the chat, what if, would you be interested in some of the just crazy stories that I can tell from uh, back in the day? I, uh, for those who don't know, I spent about 30 plus years in finance and starting off in Arkansas in the early 1980s and about 50-50 between Arkansas and New York. So kind of unusual. Um, and as you might imagine, there are dozens of just really bonkers tales I could tell. Um, Most of them I'm actually attempting to tell in a book that I've been working on, and I'm embarrassed to say how long I've been at it without completing it, but not as bad as George R. R. Martin, for those of you who follow Game of Thrones and that sort of thing, but pretty close. I actually put, well, I almost said pen to paper, but it's more like thumb to iPhone. I started writing this memoir back in, I guess, maybe 3 years ago. So I am about, I think the last time I looked, I was getting close to 60,000 words. And if you've listened to me on these live streams, I'm sure it's no surprise that I can be rather verbose. I can talk up. My wife always, when I was trying to decide whether I would start doing live streams, her only comment was, "Well, you can talk." So so here I am. Um, at any rate, I kind of, and maybe this is something too in the chat rooms. I don't know the backgrounds of everybody that subscribes, but I have to believe there's some folks that have a better handle on getting a book published than I do. I just have been writing away. But the point is, I started off in Arkansas in 1983, and at that time there were four African Americans in the finance business in the entire state of Arkansas. I was one of them. And I knew of, actually worked with two brothers that happened to be Latinos from Laredo, Texas, believe it or not. And there was one of the black guys that I never, and I keep saying guys because I didn't meet a woman in finance until it had to be the late 80s. Now, that's not to say that there were none. I knew of a couple, but I never really worked with a woman in finance until, man, I have to say it was the late 80s, maybe 1990. And they were really, I mean, it was a team of two women that the firm I worked for hired. But anyway, over the course of time, I uh, I started off at what I call a bucket shop. In fact, this shirt that I'm wearing is kind of in honor of the first place that I worked, which was very similar. If you're a movie buff and if you like finance films, there's several out there. Of course, Wall Street is one. Um, Boiler Room is, I would say, my favorite. And in that movie, you have a very young Vin Diesel. Um, there's another guy named, I want to, his last name is Ribisi, and he's got an Italian first name. I want to say it's Gianni Ribisi or it's something like that. He was in another show more recently called Sneaky Pete. So if you know this guy, you'll know who I'm talking about. And Ben Affleck is in it. And it was one of those films that kind of went under the radar, but it's about a just a fly by night brokerage operation. And the name of it was JT Marlin Securities. And so here we are, JT Marlin. And it's kind of close to my name, even though I'm an LON, not an LIN, but I digress. Um, so after working at that firm for about 6 months, I left and kind of bounced around for another 6 months and just got to the point that, I just sort of just swung for the fences, so to speak, and went and pestered the biggest firm in town, which unbeknownst to me was the biggest firm not located on Wall Street. And, I think it was one of those things that I did not know I was the only, I didn't know that they had never hired a black person in the role that I was, trying to get hired in, which would be, now we would call it a sales trader. You're kind of straddling the fence between being a salesman only and a trader only. Um, and you sort of fill both roles. Um, I walked in the door with a background in municipal securities. I'm sorry, mortgage-backed securities. The firm's claim to fame was um, municipal bonds, really. So anyway, I worked there for about 10 years and 3 days. And so I left that firm and started my own firm and ran that for um, about 5 years, which maybe we'll get to that story another day. So I met all kinds of characters. And the interesting thing was, I look back on it and there was certainly some, if not racism, just, um, I don't think that's necessarily the right word. There was nobody that was, calling me the N word. I never really, it was one of those things that once you got hired, you were in the family. So I never, especially in the beginning, I had the same opportunities as just really anybody else. I mean, there was no um, effort to stifle me, I don't think. And there may have been, and I was just too young to know. I think when I started working there, I was in my early 20s. So what did I know? Right. And I was what's the cocky enough that I just walked in the door and I literally said this. They didn't really have personnel like the HR department. It was just a guy that sort of hired people. Um, and I got a meeting with this guy and I basically said, I called him up and I said, my name's Marlon Weems. Here's how much revenue I produced in the last 6 months, and you need to hire me. And the guy literally told me after they hired me, um, he said, "Yeah, when you called up and I got off the phone and I said, some guy named Marlon Weems called. I don't know who this asshole is, but maybe we ought to look at him." so so I was too, cocky slash maybe naive to even think that they would not hire me, and so. Um, and I'm getting to the main story, but I just want to lay a little groundwork so you know kind of what the environment was. I got passed around, and I think it was because I had the resume, I had the skills, but look at me, I'm black, and everybody else is white, and so there was probably a conversation about who was going to be the person that if it all went south that would have hired me and they'd be the person to blame, I guess. Um, and as it turned out, um, the governor who had lost to Bill Clinton when Bill Clinton ran for a second time, um, they hired this guy. His name was Frank White, and Frank was a banker. I mean, like a bank, old school traditional banker, not really an investment banker, but he was a former governor. So, you got to hire the former governor. And he was in charge of the department that I, um, landed in. And he's the person who finally hired me. And when I think maybe my third or fourth meeting, I got to him. I'd sort of gotten passed up the food chain. Who's going to hire this guy? And I met with him. As my recollection, I think the meeting was 10 minutes long, and he listened to whatever I had to say, and it was sort of like, why hadn't we hired this guy already? And so that's how I got in the door at this firm. And I mentioned this last time. It's not a secret. The firm's name is Stevens Incorporated. It's still in existence. It's a privately held, family-owned business, and even back then, these guys were billionaires when there weren't that many billionaires around. So I worked there for 10 years, as I said, about halfway through, so 4 or 5 years into it. Um, and just to sort of put it in perspective, by then we'd gone through Black Monday and come out of it, but then you had the S&L crisis that happened, and um, one of the casualties of that was a bank, or an S&L rather, First South, and they had built this. I don't know. I think it's maybe a 35-story or 20-story building. Glass and steel, just beautiful, right on the Arkansas River. Well, they went bankrupt and they went out of business. Well, Stevens had the deep pockets to step in and buy that building, and they renovated it. And so we ended up moving from a little really ugly building that we were in, that they'd been in since 1930, believe it or not. And we moved into this glass and steel building, and the lobby of the bank they turned into a gigantic trading floor. And there were probably close, I would say 75 people, close to 100 maybe, that occupied this floor. And on one side you had the guys who sold stocks, and there was a perimeter of offices, and those were like the guys that dealt with individuals, the financial advisors and so on. And then on the other side of the room was me and the bond guys. Um, so by then I was pretty I wasn't the oldest guy or most tenured guy there, but I'd sort of, made my place. Now you should understand what this was, the quintessential good old boy kind of a place. So, for example, the first day that I went to work there, guys come up and they're introducing themselves to you. And there was one guy, a young guy. I don't think he was 40. I know he wasn't. He had worked at this firm since the day after the day he graduated from college. I mean, it was that kind of deal where his dad was somebody, and he just got his college degree and stepped right into a prime role at one of the biggest investment banks in the country. So you had situations where father and son, father and son are working, mom and dad are working, just all this kind of stuff. But so when I say family business, it was like that. As a matter of fact, by that point, by my 5 year point, I had actually gotten my brother a job on the stock side of the trading floor. So he and I literally could make eye contact with each other. Sometimes we call each other up and gossip and whatever. Or if I had a question about what was going on in the stock market or vice versa, we call each other. One of the other things that happened is, because I was, um, for at least the first 5 years, I was the only Black person, like in my department. There were, of all these people we're talking about, so we're talking about a trading floor of close to 100 people. There ain't nobody else that looks like me until my brother gets hired. So what would happen, especially in the beginning, there was an adjustment that people had to make from um, telling Black jokes to telling some other kind of joke. And I used to laugh at it because it was so uncomfortable for them when they would start telling some joke and then they realize, oh my God, there's this Black dude sitting right next to me. I can't really say the N word, can I? So I had the choice of, and this is something I've written about before. I suspect anyone black, especially back in those days, and we're not talking a million years ago, we're talking about the 80s and 90s. Um, in fact, my uncle, who was like a father to me, when I got this job, he pulled me aside. I went over to his house. I think it was 4th of July or something like that. And, he's sitting under his pecan tree and he's like, Marlon, I need to talk to you. And so he starts wanting to talk to me about this job. And he says, now you need to understand what kind of people you're going to be around. These are people who ain't never been around black people that weren't like a maid or a servant of some sort. And so the first time somebody calls you a boy, you cannot just cold cock them. Because what's going to happen is you're going to be the person that gets fired, right? And sure enough, there were occasions where I would get tested like that to see what was I going to do, right? And but by the time I'd been there for a while, that kind of thing went away. And it's just like anything else. I mean, you hear stories about sports. I'm not comparing myself, but Jackie Robinson, I'm sure we know the story. And then over time, people accept you or they don't, but you just kind of go on with your life, right? So it morphed from that kind of thing to occasionally somebody had a question about whether something was racist or not. Well, who you gonna ask but Marlon, right? So, so um, one thing in particular, um, and this guy was kind of as close to a mentor as I really ever had. Um, and he's passed away. His name was Don Colbert. We got to be really good friends. And he was an old school, guys, I can't even tell you, um, seersucker suit, white buck shoes kind of guy. Um, if you weren't wearing a button down shirt, you were kind of getting fancy, just old school. If you can imagine just the South, he was quintessential. Every time I watch Wall Street, and for those of you that have seen it, I want to say I think it's Hal Holbrook that's in it, and he plays this old school investment guy that's trying to, tell Charlie Sheen sort of how you're supposed to act and the principles of the business and all this. Well, this was the kind of guy that sort of took a liking to me. A little bit of background on him: he was a recovering alcoholic. You wouldn't know it just to look at him. I mean, he was, just a Southern gentleman kind of guy. But the reason he was cool with me was because, and the reason he was a recovering alcoholic was he was really into jazz. He played the drums. And in his earlier days, he had spent time down in New Orleans hanging with guys like Charlie Parker and shit like that. I mean, so he was accustomed to being around black folks, right? Hmm. So I say the magical Negro. Yeah, I was it, I guess. Not by choice, but I was the only black person that most of these people had ever been around that wasn't like waiting on them or something. That was sort of on par, professionally. So one day this guy calls me into his office, and we had just moved into this big glass and steel building. And so guys had a budget to decorate their office, get some paintings and this sort of thing. And he calls me in and he says, Marlon, I need your advice on something. And I'm thinking it's investment related or whatever, and I'm like, well, what is it, Don? And he's got a painting, a big painting that he's getting ready to hang. And he says, I want you to look at this and tell me, you think this is racist? Y'all, I'm not even making this up. It was a painting of a field of black people picking cotton. And I'm like, man, you know, if you got to ask if this is racist, the rule of thumb is probably racist. And you know, I didn't like go off on him because he really, it's probably hard to understand, but I think even now you got white people who walk around and they are never really around black people. So there's a whole bubble and they're able to say and do things without thinking about the ramifications. So this guy, now we're to a point that he's working with a young black person who he, I guess, kind of cares about my opinion of him or whatever. And so, at least, I guess, to his defense, he caught himself and like, wait a minute, this might not be a good painting to hang in my office with Marlon sitting right over there. You know, I don't know. Now, in his defense, when I left this firm after 10 years, I couldn't have had a bigger advocate. And I'm not just talking about encouragement. This guy actually like co-signed a line of credit to help my business get off the ground. So I can't be mad at him. He put his money where his mouth was, right? So I so that's the environment that I was working in. Now, the reason what got this story started was a photo that I posted in the chat a few days ago of two guys in the NFL, and this is clearly it's a photo. You can look at their shoes and the way they're dressed. It's from back in the day. I mean, way back. We're talking early '60s and mid '60s, whatever. And one of the guys, and they're both playing for the Baltimore Colts, which I guess, well, they would not be the Indianapolis Colts. I guess the Ravens is the successor to the Baltimore Colts. I think that's the way it works. And these two guys, one of them is a fellow black guy by the name of Bubba Smith. They're both since passed away. The other guy, Bubba Smith, was pretty well known, by the way. I mean, I believe after football, he did some acting. I want to say he was in Airplane or, some of those kind of movies. I know O.J. Simpson was in Airplane, but Bubba Smith, did some endorsements and he did okay for himself after football. The other guy is probably lesser well known. His name is Billy Ray Smith. Now, Billy Ray, of course, they're not related. Billy Ray Smith is from Arkansas, or was from Arkansas. He passed away in, I want to say 2001 from cancer. Billy Ray and Bubba played against Joe Namath in the legendary Super Bowl game that basically made the AFL, gave them credibility because they beat the old school NFL, right? And they were at the time, I think, 15 or 20 point underdogs, and Joe Namath guaranteed they were going to win, and they did. And I was reading just as I was preparing to tell this story. It's considered one of the biggest upsets in the world of sports. So the Baltimore Colts lost. I think that was Super Bowl III, and then they came back and they beat what used to be my team when I watched football, the Dallas Cowboys, and they won Super Bowl V. And after Super Bowl V, Billy Ray Smith retired from football. So why am I talking about this guy? Well, as it turned out, Billy Ray Smith was from Arkansas. He grew up in a Little Rock's not much to talk about. When I lived in Arkansas, the entire state I don't think the entire state had 300,000 people. Billy Ray was from Augusta, Arkansas. And we're talking about country. I mean, like I've known a couple of people from there, and it's just not a place you want to go, especially if we're talking about the 50s and 60s. And Billy Ray like probably just about everybody else in Augusta, was, grew up poor, but he was athletic and, finished high school, went to the University of Arkansas. And this is back in the days of the old Southwest Conference. And they beat Texas like 3 years in a row, which was Texas was our arch enemy. He was a Golden Gloves boxer. So he was the kind of guy that you just really did not want to fool with. And he wasn't really that big, but he was just intimidating. And he and Bubba Smith, as I understand it, at least for a time, were roommates. So you have to also think about the time we're discussing. We're talking about the early to mid 60s. Not every white guy was wanting to room with a black guy. And Billy Ray Smith grew up picking cotton with black folks. So it wasn't nothing but a thing to him, right? Now, that doesn't mean he wasn't as um, uncouth as any country white guy, but it was just the way things were at that time. He was as poor as any black person. In the off seasons, Billy Ray Smith worked for Alex Brown Securities, an investment banking firm. I think he worked in Texas. I believe that's where he was working for like a branch. So, how do I know Billy Ray Smith? Well, when Stevens expanded and bought this big building, they hired a lot of folks, and Billy Ray Smith was one of them. By that time, he'd retired from football and was a financial advisor. And so I didn't even know who this guy was. I mean, I saw him, but I didn't know he was supposed to be a big deal. I mean, he actually played in a couple, like I said, a couple of Super Bowls, all NFL, all this stuff. Didn't make the Hall of Fame, but was pretty close. Um, the way I got to know this fellow was that he would say really off-color shit to me, and in retrospect, I think it was the kind of stuff you would hear maybe in a locker room, back in the day when, you got black guys and country white guys and they're kind of like throwing bombs at each other. Not the N-word kind of stuff, but one day I'm in the break room and this is when he kind of got on my radar screen because I'm like, okay, where is this shit going? I was eating a banana and he walks in and he looks at me eating this banana and he busts out laughing. And the subtext was, you know, a black man eating a banana looks a whole lot like a gorilla eating a banana. That's the whole thing that they would say about us, right? And I picked up, I knew exactly the intimation of him laughing at me. And he said something like, I ain't even gonna say nothing, and busted out laughing and walked away. And I'm like, okay, I think I'm gonna have a problem with this guy. As it turned out, I think another time I was, the company had, in this old building they were in, um, there was a parking area. And I think he saw me go into my car. And at the time I had a Mercedes. And he saw me getting in the Mercedes. And it was funny to him that a black guy would be driving a Mercedes. And I'm like, okay, you know what? I got to get to the bottom of this. And so I started asking around about him, and guys were like, man, that's just Billy Ray. That's the kind of shit they do in the NFL, just, effing with each other. And folks talked me out of challenging this guy because, to be honest, he'd probably whip my ass. This dude he was not the kind of guy that I really, but, when you're in your 20s, you think you can beat up everybody. So as it turned out, over a period of time, he kind of, I think he got the message and he backed off. And we actually, I wouldn't say friends, but we were cordial to each other. And, I wasn't going playing golf with him, but we were cool. So one day I'm sitting at my desk. Now, mind you, I'm way on the other side of the room. We're talking about a gigantic trading floor. and my direct line rings. And I answer it. It's Billy Ray Smith calling me. And I can look and I can see him over in his office. And he's looking at me. And he's like, Marlon, um, I need to talk to you in my office. Can you come over here? And I'm like, well, what the crap can this be? So I, finish up whatever it was I was doing, and I go over and I, walk in his office. I'm thinking it's something about a client, something like this. And he's looking really like deathly serious. And he says, I need your help. I think I got a problem. Okay, what is it? As it turns out, he was being interviewed for a feature in the Sunday, one of the local newspapers. We only had two. Um, it was the Arkansas Democrat and the Arkansas Gazette, and now it's just the one paper. The Arkansas, they merged or something. And he says, "Yeah, they're doing a feature on me, because he's this former football player, NFL big time guy. Oh, and um, his relevance was this: um, his son, Billy Ray Smith Jr., played for the Arkansas Razorbacks also. And as a matter of fact, he and my brother played, not the one that worked with me, but a younger brother also played at the with the Arkansas Razorbacks at the same time as Billy Ray Smith's son, Billy Ray Smith Jr. um, my brother did not go pro, which is a whole different story. Um, I mean, in retrospect, great because he still knows his name. But um, but Billy Ray Smith Jr. went to the Chargers, and at that time he was kind of he was big time. So there was a story there. I guess what would you call it? A feel good story. Former NFL great son playing in the NFL, carrying on the tradition and all this stuff. So I'm like, man, what's your problem? How can I help? He says, well, the person interviewing me is this black lady, and I think I fucked up. And I'm like, well, how? And again, what do I have to do with this? And I don't know what he said, but I've sort of laid the groundwork of the kind of guy that he is or was. And what, as best as I can tell, is he got as familiar with this black woman as he had gotten with me without knowing me. Okay. So again, I'm like, what do you want from me? Well, as it turned out, the journalist who was interviewing him was somebody I'd gone to college with. I knew this person well at the time. I mean, we were friends. Even now, what, 50 years later, we're connected on Facebook. When I thought about this story, I literally hit her up on Facebook, Facebook Messenger, and I'm like, hey, you remember that time Billy Ray Smith, you interviewed him and blah, blah, blah. And she's in Europe. She's doing whatever. I think maybe one of her kids is going, like going to school out of the country or something like that. If they're smart, they'll leave him there. And so, yeah, it was I guess when he first met this person, and there had been a series of interviews. You know how they do. They, maybe come to your house, or you go out to lunch, and then they, come to the workplace, ask you questions. And apparently he just bombed in the most racist way he could have. And he's needing somebody to pull him out the fire. And he comes to me. And I thought about it and I said, you know what, let me call this person. And I did. And because I wasn't going to blindside her. Oh, what he wanted, the way he wanted me to help him, he said, so I'm supposed to have lunch with her. And honestly, man, if I do, I just don't think it's going to go well. Would you have lunch with us since you know this person? I said, let me think about it. So I go and I call her right away. And she didn't tell me, she's a journalist, right? She didn't tell me what the guy said or did, but frostiness of her voice when I told her why I was calling told me something, maybe just this side of the N word had happened. So I agree to go to lunch with him. By the way, this story actually has a happy ending. um, so I forget where we went, but some nice restaurant in Little Rock, and it was very awkward for a minute. And I guess I tried to kind of loosen everybody up because, that's the kind of guy I am. And so, she didn't like throw her drink in his face. And I guess I did what I needed to do to just kind of settle things down. Um, After lunch, we went to Billy Ray's house, and she was, going to tour the house, and we got there. It was in a nice neighborhood, nothing fancy, just a, kind of, I don't know, middle class, nice house, right? Um, and I don't know what I expected, but we went in. I think his wife may have passed on by then, so I think maybe he was living by himself. And we went in his house, and he's showing us around, and it's again nothing fancy. And he says, "Let me show you my den. That's where all my stuff is," talking about his football stuff. Again, I didn't know much about this guy. And so we walked downstairs. I swear to God, y'all, it was like the Hall of Fame. And I don't really watch the NFL anymore, but back then I was all over it. And when we got down there, I was just like, wow. There was a gigantic photograph that was framed, and uh, it was the cover of Sports Illustrated magazine, and it's like from Super Bowl III, the one they lost to Joe Namath, and Joe Namath is like in the pocket, getting ready to pass, and Bubba Smith, the guy in the photo, the black guy, and Billy Ray are just coming down on him, and dirt's flying all up in the air. It's one of those, what do you call it, fast motion photography, so you can see like the grains of dirt and all, these, I mean, just old school football, right? I've never seen anything like this. And so that was like in the center of the room. And then all around, just trophy after trophy, boxing trophies, and various football memorabilia and stuff like that. And the one thing I remember out of all of it was there was a football helmet that he had worn, and it had a bunch of signatures. I don't know, I guess when he retired a bunch of guys signed it. But it's amazing that these guys lived. I mean, Billy Ray passed away, I think, at 66, a year younger than me. This helmet, you know how you got these helmets now, and they got all this padding and all this stuff. I mean, there was just basically like a little woven cap inside of it that fit on your head, and there was nothing else, right? And the helmet had a crack that went all the way back where he had hit somebody or somebody had hit him, and that was the result. And so I'm just looking at this stuff as a, and even the person, the journalist, recognized we're like in the middle of some greatness here, right? Even though dude's like more than borderline racist, but damn, he was good at something. And so I guess that was what melted the ice all the way, because, you know, he was in his element. He wasn't trying to be funny and make little freaking off color jokes. He was in his element, and he actually talked to both of us like real people. And I think we stayed down in that den maybe for an hour as he was just, I got this for doing X, and I got this right here, and, just all this stuff. And so, anyway, I thought about this story the other day. I don't know what made me think about it. And in fact, I have written past in the book that I'm working on, I've written past the part. So I got to go back and fit this in because it was one of those things that happened. I just totally forgotten about it. And the other day, my it was after my daughter's graduation, and she said something, and it just sort of popped in my head. And I was like, did I ever tell you about this time? Blah, blah. And she didn't know about it. My wife, of course, Shannon knows everything. She's heard all my stories 5 or 6 times. That's why she's not even in the room, because she already knows all this stuff. But anyway, that was um, one of the things that now that I remember it, I really feel like I got to go back and give that story some space in this memoir that I'm working on. And so there we are. I mean, that's today's story from back in the day. I hope it was a good one. So if you guys like this sort of thing, if you haven't already, please subscribe. If you're a free subscriber, check your email, which I guess I'll close on this. Tomorrow we have a I don't even know how I pull this off, but like I said earlier, I got enough hubris left that I don't know when I'm not supposed to be able to do something. But I was able to um, convince the chief economist for Redfin, which, if you don't know the name, Redfin um, is I guess you would compare them to Zillow, in terms of real estate. They're an enormous real estate company. They have an app, do a lot online, and I think they're in 100 markets in between the United States and Canada. And so tomorrow, after the market closes, 4 o'clock, I have a one-on-one interview with Daryl Fairweather, PhD, chief economist for Redfin. And in the current climate, with all of the tariff stuff that's going on, it's, I think, going to be just such a timely conversation that we can have. And for a little newsletter like mine, I'm kind of proud that I was able to convince her to give us some time. So if you're a subscriber, you're going to probably see something in your inbox. Um, I'm trying to encourage as many people as possible to upgrade to being a paid subscriber because I'm I spent a lot of time on this. And my wife's starting to look at me funny. But no, seriously, it's a I mean, it's not like a full-time job like I'm used to, 70 hours a week, but um, I am, I guess, OCD enough that I just have to know what's up. And um, and so I spend a lot of time just trying to make sure I understand what's going on and the ramifications and so forth, so that I don't embarrass myself when I talk to a chief economist with a public company. Um, so anyway, put that on your calendar and check your email. I offer what I think is a good deal for those interested in upgrading, and even if you don't, I still appreciate the support, and hopefully everybody join this. And I just have to go back and I don't know, maybe have a couple of shots of whiskey, and I'll be able to remember another good story. So anyway, hope you folks enjoyed it, and until next time, I will see you on the other side. Take care, folks. Bye bye.